Emphatic.
Emphatic.
An emphatic denial.
Wilde was emphatic that the event should go ahead. Wilde was emphatic that the event should go ahead.
He was pretty emphatic about me leaving. Emphysema.
Emphysema.
The Empire.
Empire. He thinks he's still living in the Empire days.
The Roman Empire. A business empire.
Empire building.
Empire building.
Empirical.
Empirical.
Empirical evidence. Empiricism.
Empiricism.
Emplacement.
Emplacement.
A gun emplacement.
Employ.
Employ.
The factory employs over 2,000 people.
Kelly is employed as a mechanic. Kelly is employed as a mechanic. We have been employed to look at ways of reducing waste. We have been employed to look at ways of reducing waste. We have been employed to look at ways of reducing waste.
The report examines teaching methods employed in the classroom.
Her days are employed in gardening and voluntary work. He had a number of servants in his employ. Employable.
Employable.
The training scheme aims to make people more employable.
Employee.
Employee.
A government employee. Employer.
Employer.
The shoe factory is the largest employer in this area.
Employment.
Employment.
She was offered employment in the sales office.
Terms and conditions of employment. The employment prospects for science graduates are excellent. The employment prospects for science graduates are excellent.
Steve's still looking for full-time employment.
The needs of women who combine paid employment and care for their families.
21.7% of all those in employment were in part-time jobs.
Mexican law prohibits the employment of children under 14.
Nationwide employment now stands at 95%. Many economists consider full employment an unrealistic goal. Was the employment of force justified? Employment agency.
Employment agency.
Emporium.
Emporium.
Empower.
Empower.
The Voting Rights Act was needed to empower minority groups.
The President is empowered to appoint judges to the Supreme Court.
Empress.
Empress.
Empties.
Empties.
The barman collected the empties. The barman collected the empties.
Emptiness.
Emptiness.
She felt an emptiness in her heart when he left.
The silence and emptiness of the desert.
Empty.
Empty.
An empty box.
An empty bottle. An empty space behind the desk. The fuel tank's almost empty.
I hate coming home to an empty house. The hall was half empty.
The streets were empty.
The building stood empty for several years. I spotted an empty table in the corner. He put his feet on an empty chair.
The divorce left him feeling empty and bitter. Her life felt empty and meaningless.
The beach was almost empty of people. The beach was almost empty of people. His repeated promises to pay them back were just empty words.
I can't work properly on an empty stomach.
With the country running on empty, the president has no hope of winning the election.
Did you empty the dishwasher?
Eleanor emptied the contents of the envelope onto the table.
He emptied out the ashtray.
Ruth emptied her glass in one gulp.
The stores were closing and the streets began to empty.
The Mississippi River empties into the Gulf of Mexico.
Empty-handed.
Empty-handed.
I spent all morning looking for a suitable present, but came home empty-handed.
Empty-headed.
Empty-headed. EMS. EMS. EMS.
Emu.
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 Emulate.
Emulate.
He hoped to emulate the success of Wilder.
Emulsifier.
Emulsifier.
Emulsify.
Emulsify.
Emulsion.
Emulsion.
In.
Enlarge.
Endanger. Encircle.
Un.
A golden crown.
Wooden seats.
Darken.
Strengthen.
Enable.
Enable.
The loan enabled Jan to buy the house.
There are plans to enlarge the runway to enable jumbo jets to land.
Find out more about our free internet-enabled software.
Enabling.
Enabling.
Enact.
Enact.
A drama enacted on a darkened stage.
Congress refused to enact the bill.
Enamel.
Enamel.
Enamored.
Enamored.
You don't seem very enamored with your job. He was greatly enamored of Elizabeth.
On block.
On block.
You cannot dismiss these stories on block.
In camp.
In camp.
The army was encamped near Damascus.
Encampment.
Encampment.
A military encampment.
Encapsulate.
Encapsulate.
The words of the song neatly encapsulate the mood of the country at that time.
Her whole philosophy can be encapsulated in this one sentence.
The leaking fuel rods will be encapsulated in lead.
Encase.
Encase.
His broken leg was encased in plaster.
Uns.
Existence.
Occurrence.
Encephalitis.
Encephalitis.
Enchant.
Enchant.
I was enchanted by the way she smiled. The garden enchanted her.
Enchanted.
Enchanted.
She was enchanted with the flowers you sent her.
An enchanted castle.
Enchanter.
Enchanter.
Enchanting.
Enchanting.
An enchanting place.
An enchanting story.
The child looked enchanting in a pale blue dress.
Enchantment.
Enchantment.
The enchantment of poetry.
Enchantress.
Enchantress.
Enchilada.
Enchilada.
We're aiming our products at the big enchilada, the home computer market. Come on, let's hear it, the whole enchilada.
Encircle.
Encircle.
The island was encircled by a dusty road.
Enclave.
Enclave.
The former Portuguese enclave of East Timor.
Enclose.
Enclose.
Please enclose a cheque with your order.
Please find enclosed an agenda for the meeting. The pool area is enclosed by a 6-foot wall.
An enclosed area.
Enclosure.
Enclosure.
The bear enclosure at the zoo.
The enclosure of arable land for pasture.
Encode.
Encode.
Encomium.
Encomium.
Encompass.
Encompass.
The study encompasses the social, political and economic aspects of the situation.
The houses encompassed about 100 square meters.
Encounter.
Encounter.
They encountered serious problems when 2 members of the expedition were injured.
The government has encountered strong opposition to its plans to raise income tax. The doctor had encountered several similar cases in the past.
I first encountered him when studying at Cambridge.
She didn't remember our encounter last summer.
His first encounter with Wilson was back in 1989.
Bernstein began training the young musician after a chance encounter at a concert. Casual sexual encounters. Hostile encounters between supporters of rival football teams.
A child's first encounter with books. A close encounter with a snake. Encourage.
Encourage.
I want to thank everyone who has encouraged and supported me. Kuda was encouraged to begin playing the guitar by his father.
Fleur encouraged Dana in her ambition to become a model. Cantor didn't mind if they worked late. In fact, he actively encouraged it. Cantor didn't mind if they worked late. In fact, he actively encouraged it.
A 10p rise in cigarette prices is not enough to encourage smokers to stop.
Violent TV programs encourage antisocial behavior.
She felt encouraged by the many letters of support.
Encouragement.
Encouragement.
With encouragement, Sally is starting to play with the other children.
Words of encouragement. She needed no encouragement to continue.
Encouraging.
Encouraging.
The encouraging news is that typhoid is on the decrease. The encouraging news is that typhoid is on the decrease.
The signs are encouraging, but there's a long way to go.
Encroach.
Encroach.
Bureaucratic power has encroached upon the freedom of the individual.
The fighting encroached further east.
Foreign encroachment.
Encrusted.
Encrusted.
A gold crown encrusted with diamonds.
Encrypt.
Encrypt.
Secure encryption of data.
Files stored in encrypted form.
Encumber.
Encumber.
He died in 1874, heavily encumbered by debt.
The whole process was encumbered with bureaucracy.
Encyclical.
Encyclical.
Encyclopedia.
Encyclopedia.
The Encyclopedia of Music.
Encyclopedic.
Encyclopedic.
End.
End.
costs are expected to double by the end of 2005.
What would she find at the end of her journey?
Hooker's death marked the end of an era. Hooker's death marked the end of an era.
I played the tape from beginning to end.
It's hoped the talks may bring an end to the violence.
The EU is demanding an end to the ivory trade.
At last it seemed the war might be coming to an end.
The spacecraft is nearing the end of its useful life.
He rose to indicate that the conversation was at an end. Well, I hope that's the end of the matter. Another year has passed, with no end in sight to the suffering.
We sat at opposite ends of the table.
He wore spectacles perched on the very end of his nose.
The end of the pencil snapped. Joe joined the end of the line.
The far end of the room.
The channel measures 20 feet from end to end.
He stood the box on end to open it.
Bricks laid end to end.
The cheaper end of the price range.
At the opposite end of the political spectrum are the Marxist theories. At the opposite end of the political spectrum are the Marxist theories.
Some teenagers are just a nuisance, but at the other end of the scale there are kids who pose a real threat.
Sometimes, all you need is a calm voice on the end of the phone.
We'll get a bus connection at the other end.
Any problems at your end?
Cigarette ends. 40% of all research is undertaken for military ends.
She'll do anything to achieve her own ends.
Every task has a clear end in view.
He wants to cut costs, and to that end is looking at ways of cutting the company's operations.
IT is a tool for learning, not merely an end in itself.
She works in the sales end of things. He met his end in a car accident.
At the end of the day, it's his decision.
He was tortured for days on end.
What did you decide in the end? What did you decide in the end? I'm not going. End of story.
Frustrated and bitter, Hogan had reached the end of his tether with politics. Frustrated and bitter, Hogan had reached the end of his tether with politics.
Our marriage had reached the end of the line.
When Mike lost his job, we could barely make ends meet.
Your letter cheered me up no end.
This will cause no end of trouble.
What will she do next? She's the living end.
I go to the ends of the earth to be with him. I go to the ends of the earth to be with him.
World War II ended in 1945.
The festival will end with a spectacular laser show.
The talks are aimed at ending the conflict. I think we'll end there for today.
I'd like to end by inviting questions from the audience.
This is where the line ends. They ended the game with a score of 63-42. The company ended the year with record profits.
He ended his days in prison.
The movie with the car chase to end all car chases.
The financial results for the year ending 31st of December 2001.
1 in 3 marriages ends in divorce.
He came round for a coffee and we ended up having a meal together. He came round for a coffee and we ended up having a meal together.
I wondered where the pictures would end up after the auction. I wondered where the pictures would end up after the auction.
Most slimmers end up putting weight back on. Anyone who swims in the river could end up with a nasty stomach upset.
He could end up as president.
I don't want to end up like my parents.
In danger.
Endanger.
Smoking during pregnancy endangers your baby's life.
Charges of child endangerment.
Endangered.
Endangered.
The lizards are classed as an endangered species. Endear.
Endear.
The emperor saw an opportunity to endear himself to the Athenians.
Endearing.
Endearing.
Shyness is one of her most endearing qualities.
An endearing smile.
Endearment.
Endearment.
Nicknames and other terms of endearment.
Endeavour.
Endeavor.
We always endeavor to please our customers. An outstanding example of human endeavor.
They made every endeavour to find the 2 boys.
Despite our best endeavours, we couldn't start the car.
Endemic.
Endemic.
Violent crime is now endemic in parts of Chicago.
Endgame.
Endgame.
Ending.
Ending.
A story with a happy ending.
Coffee is the perfect ending to a meal.
The first election since the ending of the dictatorship.
Verbal nouns have the ending ing.
Endive.
Endive.
Endless.
Endless.
An endless stream of visitors.
The possibilities are endless.
He's been in a lot of trouble. Drugs, guns, blackmail, the list is endless.
An endless round of boring meetings.
This city is endlessly fascinating.
Endocrine.
Endocrine.
The endocrine glands.
Endorphin.
Endorphin.
Endorse.
Endorse.
The Prime Minister is unlikely to endorse this view.
Endorsement.
Endorsement. The official endorsement of his candidacy.
To say it is the least bad system is hardly a ringing endorsement.
Celebrity endorsements.
Endoscope.
Endoscope.
Endoscopy.
Endoscopy.
Endow.
Endow.
Her resistance to the nationalists endowed her with legendary status.
She was endowed with good looks.
Endowment.
Endowment.
Endowment policy.
Endowment policy.
End product.
End product.
A high-quality end product. The end product of years of practice. The end product of years of practice.
End result.
End result.
If tasks are too challenging, the end result is that learners are discouraged.
Endurable.
Endurable.
Endurance.
Endurance.
She was pushed beyond her powers of endurance.
The marathon is a test of endurance.
Endure.
Endure.
It seemed impossible that anyone could endure such pain.
He can't endure being apart from me.
Friendships which endure over many years.
Enduring.
Enduring.
The enduring appeal of Shakespeare's plays.
Enduring hatred.
An enduringly popular performer.
End user.
End user.
End zone.
End zone.
Enema.
Enema.
Enemy.
Enemy.
She's a dangerous enemy to have.
Cats and dogs have always been natural enemies.
An old enemy of her father. A ruthless businessman who made a lot of enemies.
The unforgettable sight of the President shaking hands with his sworn enemy. The unforgettable sight of the President shaking hands with his sworn enemy.
I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. Political enemies.
He was imprisoned for being an enemy of the revolution.
He was accused of collaboration with the enemy.
A town behind enemy lines. The usual enemies, cigarettes and alcohol, are targeted for tax rises. The usual enemies, cigarettes and alcohol, are targeted for tax rises.
The common enemy that united them was communism.
His views made him public enemy number 1 in the eyes of the media. Efforts to label environmentalists as the enemy within.
Boredom is the enemy of learning.
Energetic.
Energetic.
An energetic man.
An energetic drive to get more customers.
We need to be more energetic in promoting ourselves abroad.
He fought energetically against apartheid.
Energetic.
Energize.
Energize.
The charity hopes the campaign will energize its volunteers. The charity hopes the campaign will energize its volunteers. Energy.
Energy.
The water is heated using energy from the sun. The water is heated using energy from the sun. The problem with nuclear energy is dealing with the waste. Where do those kids get their energy from? Where do those kids get their energy from? Are you suffering from a lack of energy? The city is full of creative energy. I really put a lot of energy into what I do. He wants to conserve his energy for next week's game.
There was a lot of energy in the room this morning. Did you feel it?
Kinetic energy.
She's devoting all her energies to the wedding plans.
Energy efficient.
Energy efficient. How can we make our homes more energy efficient?
Enervate.
Enervate.
The hot sun enervated her to the point of collapse.
David felt too enervated to resist. Enfant terrible.
Enfant terrible.
Enfeebled.
Enfeebled.
Enfold.
Enfold.
The wizard screamed as the darkness enfolded him. The wizard screamed as the darkness enfolded him.
He reached out to enfold her in his arms. He reached out to enfold her in his arms. He reached out to enfold her in his arms. Enforce.
Enforce.
Governments make laws and the police enforce them.
Parking restrictions will be strictly enforced.
It's unlikely that a record company would enforce its views on an established artist.
The recommendations are not legally enforceable.
Enforced.
Enforced.
A period of enforced isolation.
Enforcement.
Enforcement.
Law enforcement.
Enforcer.
Enforcer.
A law enforcer.
An enforcer for a drugs gang.
Enfranchise.
Enfranchise.
The enfranchisement of EU citizens.
Newly enfranchised shareholders.
Engage.
Engage.
Only 10% of American adults engage in regular exercise.
The two parties engaged upon an escalating political struggle.
Mr. Armstrong was engaged in prayer.
Despite her illness, she remains actively engaged in shaping policy.
The toy didn't engage her interest for long.
Are you so tired you don't have the energy to engage with your kids? Are you so tired you don't have the energy to engage with your kids?
Her father engaged a tutor to improve her maths. Her father engaged a tutor to improve her maths.
We'd be able to engage local people as volunteers.
She engaged the clutch and the car moved.
The wheel engages with the cog and turns it.
American forces did not directly engage.
Engaged.
Engaged.
Have you heard? Sally and Ray are getting engaged.
She's engaged to be married.
Kate's engaged to Mark.
She rang Mrs. Tavert, but the line was engaged.
Engagement.
Engagement.
Their engagement was announced in the paper.
Tony was stunned when Lisa suddenly broke off their engagement.
The princess will continue to carry out royal engagements. This is his only public speaking engagement on the tour.
His excuse of a prior engagement was accepted.
A strategy of engagement and cooperation with China.
Many students pass without any real engagement in learning. Many students pass without any real engagement in learning.
Military rules of engagement.
Please sign to indicate your acceptance of the terms of engagement. Please sign to indicate your acceptance of the terms of engagement.
Engaging.
Engaging.
An engaging smile.
Engender.
Engender.
The changes in society engendered by the war.
Relationships that engender trust in children.
Engine.
Engine.
The engine won't start.
He switched off the car's engine and waited.
Is the engine running smoothly?
An old steam engine. We were stranded with engine trouble on a deserted highway.
The Marshall Plan was the engine of post-war economic growth.
Rome's deadly war engine.